So we've got two parts playing in bringing people to Venersborg. Number one, worthless land and an enterprising man. So he suckers it, he brings the people out here with good intentions to give them a home. And secondly, there was a crop of fruit that put money in their pocket, and you could survive here in Venersborg in the early years by growing fruit. So the third part that helped bring people into Venersborg, we have to go back to what was happening in Sweden. And so in the late 1800s, Sweden was going through some tough times. They had just lost their empire. They had conquered most of Norway, all of Finland, most of Denmark, into Germany, and they were expanding their empire when things on the political scene went bad. And as they were collapsing, the neighboring Scandinavians didn't really like the Swedes. That carried over to this country. And so the Swedes were kind of, and especially with the Finns, there wasn't a lot of mixing between them. There was ethnic problems. And so that's a fact to keep in mind as we talk about the Swedes being here and the Finns being over there. They didn't always see eye to eye because of history of problems. Okay, Sweden had class distinction. There was a caste system in Sweden. And Laplanders like me, you could never go anyplace. You had to work for somebody, you could never own land, you couldn't do anything. You were limited by what the government would allow. And so it was tough life for the guys who weren't the true blood Swedes. Okay, so that was in existence and somewhat still exists today. Not long ago we had a young man come from Sweden whose project was to record what happened to the Swedish immigrants. He came from Sweden to record, and so I toured him around, and perhaps you were involved too? Oh.
So it's just
okay. So I asked him, I said, well, how does it work in Sweden today? Because I knew something of the background. And he was wanting to be an engineer. And he said, the government says we need, let's say, 25 engineers this year. That's it. And so if you want to be an engineer and you're not in the 25, there's no work for you. Because those guys are already figured out where they're going to be. And they've already figured out what the needs are. So they tell the school, you can't even get into the school. So if you want an engineering degree, and he was pursuing an engineering degree, if you want one, and the government has already filled those allocations, you're on your own. You have to go out of the country to get it. And once you get it and you come back, you're going to have to find work. Because there is no work. It's already delegated to those. And Sweden works that way. It's a different mindset. And so when my relatives came over to talk with me and visit and so on, I was asking them about things of life and so on. And this young lady was there, and I was asking about her grandparents because they would know more of my family. And she explained that she never saw them. And I said, well, that's kind of funny. You live in the same town, but well, the government takes care of her with another lady. The government provides her with a family to take care of her, so I don't have to go take care of my grandma. There's a different nobility lines. If you're not part of the nobility, you're stuck in the position that you are in the caste system. This breeds aggravation amongst the troops. The rank and file are getting fed up with this, especially when they hear what's happening in the rest of the world. There's new freedoms that are coming and so on. Well, the government there controlled a significant amount of their individual lives, including the religion. So it was state-run religion. And every church in Sweden, even to this day, preaches the same sermon on the Sunday, whether there's a person in there or not. And so if you're traveling in Sweden, you go into a church on Sunday, you'll find one person, the pastor up there giving the sermon, and an empty church. But it doesn't matter where you go, you'll hear the same sermon, because the government gives it to you. And it's their idea of what should be taught and preached. And the people don't attend, obviously, because the government's involved. And they are getting fed up back in those days. Okay, Sweden, because of their situation of losing their empire, had set up a whole bunch of treaties which stretched their resources in order to stay cognizant as a country. Their economics were stretched. The futures were not particularly rosy there. So you got all these things playing a part. People are going, you know, I keep hearing this rumor about this land of plenty and promise, you know. And so in the ranks of Sweden, which is a military monarchy, there was a group called the Lemana Party, which started grassroots by the ordinary guy. And he started going to the king and saying, look, guy, if you don't do this, we're out of here. And so that was 1885 time frame then. So the rank and file had become acquainted with things out of the Bible, because as Lutheran brought Protestantism in, that allowed them to have a Bible. The Catholics kept the Bible to themselves, wouldn't let people read. So they were reading in here, because it was only book to read, that's all the government would allow them to have. And they were reading in there, and they read some things. And they read a verse like, there is neither Jew or Greek, there is neither slave or free man, there is neither male or female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. That just took the caste system and threw it in the tank. And they're standing there going, that's in the Bible. What are we doing here? You know, and they're going in their mind and they're wondering what's going on. And so here's another verse here that they were aware of. Were you called while a slave? Do not worry about it, but if you are able also to become free, rather do that. They were not free. And here's their book telling them, hey, become free if you can. And so they're reading this, they're hearing the rumors about freedoms in this land of plenty, and they are looking at their own country and they're saying, wow, this place is in a mess. And they're getting, you know, what else is available for me? And so they understood completely what liberty was being talked about that Jesus Christ offers for man's things that he sets up, because every society on the face of the earth has picked their object of worship. Doesn't matter where you're at. You can be islands in the Pacific, you can go wherever. They always come up with these man-made religions. And so they were aware of those, and all of those religions have rules. You gotta do this, you gotta do this, to impress God, or whatever. And people would keep them under control with those rules. And so the Catholics were really good at that, and many others as well. So they were aware that Jesus says, hey, those things don't count. It's what's in your heart. And so they said, wow, you know, we're looking at the Bible, and it's telling us something entirely different than our country is operating with. So they're getting, you know, kind of upset. And in the late 1800s and about 1890, they began to say, enough of this. And they started their own religions. Okay, so there were two major ones that came to Venersborg. This is why the immigrants left Sweden. They're fed up with the government, they're fed up with the economy, they're fed up with the caste system. They've got all the stuff and negative things, and they're saying, we want out of here. So prior to leaving, they started their own grassroots religion systems, and they had one called the Methodist Episcopal and another one translated from Swedish Mission Friends. And so when they came to Venersborg, they brought that with them. So right up on the hill, right up there, is a church building that was the Methodist Episcopal, the first one built in 1912. And so they came here and built that as they recognized the value of being in the United States, and came because people asked them to. And there was some trouble getting into the country, as they recognized that getting to the United States was going to be difficult. My grandparents, because they did not have a sponsor, did not have a job, and couldn't speak the language, were not allowed in. So they went to Canada. Canada was open arms. We want all the immigrants we can get, because the land was sparsely populated. So they went into Canada and went through Canada and came over to British Columbia, and then came into the United States from there. And so there was difficulties getting here, but there was a lot of things driving them. The home front, the religious front, you know, things were just not cool over there. And they heard all these rumors about the land. And so I'm explaining here that my parents on the Forsgren side went through Canada to get there. And the way he got in is he started working for the railroad in Canada and sweeping out boxcars. That gave him a job. His sister was in Portland. That gave him a sponsor. His kids started to learn the language so they could get by the language barrier. He was okay health-wise. That was another issue. You had to have good health in order to get to the United States. So he came to Portland, and with his very first paycheck, he bought an American flag. That blows me away. You know, after being turned away, amazing. Well, he went to work in Portland for the railroad and was sweeping out boxcars. And he happened to notice one of J.C. Landerberg's signs nailed up on a power pole out on the street in Portland on his way home from work. And he thought, that looks pretty cool. They speak the language, you know. It offered an ethnic background of Swedish that he could get to buddies who he could talk with. The land was somewhat similar from what he was familiar with. Big trees, rough country. You know, because in Sweden up north, there's fjords where the water comes in and steep and so on. And he was used to the cold. And they had a social event, you know, every night. People went and talked with other people and so on. A chance to own land, you know, something you would never dream of in Sweden. And as my mom graduated from the University of Portland, he was standing beside me. And he said, only a serf's daughter in America could do this. You know, as he looked at what was next to impossible from the land that he came from. And so it looked like a neat place to him. He was holding church services in his house at the time. They could worship the Bible as the Bible was taught instead of how the government taught it. And so that really was attractive for him. And he found a whole bunch of other Swedes who were of similar vein. And so when he got out here, since he was amongst the first to hit the road out here, hit the ground, his first job was to help the surveyor that J.C. Landerberg had hired to divvy up the land. And if you're familiar with the surveying out in Venersborg, you know that it's way off. But anyway, not his fault. The surveyor. So he got a job doing that. Then he went to work in the mills and so on. But J.C. Landerberg, thanks to my grandfather, set aside some land for a church. Because J.C. Landerberg, he didn't care about nothing. You know, all he wanted was his buck, and he was gone. So he did. He set aside a half acre, which is right up there. And they built, by volunteer labor, the Methodist Episcopal Church. And there's stories that are interesting to talk about that too. So on his side, though, he was from the Mission Friends, the grassroots group from Sweden, and he talked the Kullbergs into donating a piece of land, and this building was built on it, designed and built by John Kullberg, who had no experience in designing buildings or whatever. And so that was the first Mission Friends, built in 1914. This was built in 1912, and so we've celebrated it on 1913 as kind of a halfway point in between. So as time went by and World War II hit, the Mission Friends Church got down to just 3 or 4 people, and so they decided to call it quits. They gave the building and property, long story here, to the Mission Friends people. And so Mission Friends people decided to move their church down beside the Methodist Episcopal. Here's at that point where the block foundation is being put in, and you can see the excavation here. Nothing's happened between the two. It had just gotten moved down here. The Homola brothers moved it with leftover World War II equipment, half-tracks. You're familiar with those, that they bought for little or nothing and moved it down the hill. So here's the church today, right there, with the Mission Friends part of it welded to the Methodist Episcopal,